In this video, we're going to talk about the 2008 film Quantum of Solace. And warning, spoiler alert. So this is a movie where Bond goes on a rampage tour of vengeance through South America, where James Bond faces off against a bad guy so bland and non-threatening that he looks more like a middle manager than a Bond villain, where Bond faces a powerful international Spectre-like organization whose main goal is to become a Bolivian utilities company, where the movie starts without a gun barrel sequence, but rather throws us into a car chase that is so confusing that we don't know who is James Bond and who the bad guys are. With the fast cuts and quick edits, this James Bond movie basically looks more like a Jason Bourne movie than a 007 film. A movie that shows us what happens when you start filming without a finished script. A movie that shows us what happens when you hire an auteur director who has never directed an action sequence before. In 2006, I absolutely loved Casino Royale, and I was very excited for Quantum of Solace. I read all the gossip and hype and tried to find any spoilers, and when it was released, I saw Quantum of Solace on opening night. And I liked it enough, although it was clear that this was a clearly inferior follow-up to Casino Royale. And there were things that I liked and things that I didn't like. Like, I liked the fact that this was a direct sequel to the last film. I also thought Daniel Craig was in top form and truly established himself as the James Bond 007 character of this generation. I thought the main cast of Judi Dench's M, Ugo Kurienko as Camille Montes, and Gemma Arterton as Strawberry Fields were great. And I also enjoyed seeing the return of Matthis and Felix Leiter. And I liked the idea of a vast Spectre-like organization named Quantum who genuinely seemed powerful enough to shape world events. Of course, the 2015 film Spectre will retcon Quantum to be a subsidiary of Spectre, but in 2008, I liked that wink-wink introduction of Quantum as Spectre. And overall, the movie was fast-paced, and it was an enjoyable roller coaster ride. And I like James Bond's character arc in this movie, where he goes from being driven by rage to being at peace by the end of the movie. Now, however, there were some weaknesses in the movie, and they became more pronounced the more I saw this film. First, the story seemed a little weaker than past Bond films, and certainly weaker than Casino Royale. We'll find out that there was a reason for this, that they were basically working without a finished script, and I'll talk about that reason in a few minutes. I also thought that the action sequences were way too choppy and chaotic and really hard to follow, and the action sequences didn't have the emotional weight of a lot of the past Bond films. And worst of all was the main villain, Dominic Greene, who seemed too non-threatening and pathetic to pose a serious threat to James Bond. And that was too bad because I love Matthis Amalric in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and I really thought he's a fantastic actor. Now, the origins of this movie, initially known as Bond 22, go all the way back to 2005 and the development of the 2006 Casino Royale. Sony Pictures and the consortium that owned MGM had approved two movies, Bond 21 and Bond 22, at the same time. And the initial plan was to release Casino Royale in November of 2006, and then the sequel film, this film, only 18 months later in the summer of 2008. Screenwriters Neal Purvis and Robert Wade wrote Casino Royale to be left as a cliffhanger, which would continue immediately with Bond 22. And in the original story treatment for this film, Bond would capture Mr. White, played by Jesper Christensen, interrogate him for a while, and then release him in Siena, Italy, and then follow him to a mysterious unnamed Spectre-like organization where its leader, a man named Dante, and he'd be working with Yusuf Kabira, who was Vesper's boyfriend and the man who set Vesper up to work for Mr. White and betray James Bond. Now, as Casino Royale entered post-production, Eon Pictures hired Roger Mitchell, who had directed Notting Hill, the 1999 romantic comedy starring Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant, and Venus, the 2006 comedy starring Peter O'Toole. He had worked with Daniel Craig and had directed him in the 2003 The Mother and the 2004 film Enduring Love. However, Roger Mitchell waited for the screenplay, and when none came, he stepped down as director and cited the lack of a script as the reason why he was quitting. And by October 2006, they still did not have a completed script, and it was looking like the summer 2008 release date was impossible. Sony Pictures Vice Chairman Paul Blake also realized there was no way they can release this movie by summer of 2008 and pushed the release date back to November of 2008. So Eon began looking for a new director, and once again they considered Tony Scott, whom they considered for Die Another Day, the legendary director who had directed Top Gun, but also Beverly Hills Cop 2, Days of Thunder, The Last Boy Scout, True Romance, Crimson Tide, and Enemy of the State. They also considered Jonathan Mostow, who had directed U-571 and Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. And also considered Alex Proyas, who had directed The Crow with Brandon Lee, Dark City, and I, Robot. And in June 2007, Marc Forster was announced as director. And at this time, Marc Forster was not known as an action director and was known as an artistic director of dramas. He had directed Monsters Ball and helped Halle Berry win an Academy Award. He directed Finding Neverland, the Johnny Depp film where he plays J.M. Barr, the man who wrote Peter Pan, and directed Stranger Than Fiction. Marc Forster was not a James Bond fan and said that had they asked him to direct a James Bond film anytime before 2006, he would have absolutely said no. However, Marc Forster loved the 2006 Casino Royale film and was excited to direct the follow-up film. Now, Marc Forster was German who was raised in Switzerland and was the first director of a Bond film not to be born within the British Commonwealth. Marc Forster worked closely with Barbara Broccoli and Michael J. Wilson and was dedicated to bringing their vision of the character to the big screen. Also, the three agreed that Casino Royale, closing in at 2 hours and 24 minutes, was a little too long, and in contrast, he wanted to create a shorter, much tighter and faster film, which Marc Forster described as being like a bullet. Marc Forster was also influenced by real-world politics of mega multinational corporations who had the power to control governments through commercial resources. So Neal Purvis and Robert Wade finally completed their first draft of the screenplay in August of 2007, and Paul Haggis, who had revised Casino Royale, was also brought in to work on this script. And Paul Haggis, Michael G. Wilson, and Marc Forster began writing the final script. And the story was titled Sleep of the Dead. And Paul Haggis barely finished the first pass at revising the script in November 5th, 2007, when the Writers Guild announced that they would be on strike in 2007 to 2008. And in fact, Paul Haggis was able to turn in his official screenplay 2 hours before the writer's strike officially began, thus avoiding violating the conditions of the Writers Guild. However, because of the writer's strike, Paul Haggis was only able to write one draft of the screenplay, and the production team had no finished script. So from here on out, there were no professional screenwriters for Bond 22. Therefore, director Marc Forster began writing the revisions to Paul Haggis' story, and this explains why the final story of Quantum of Solace may be the way that it is. So why didn't they pause the project, wait for the writer's strike to end, so that they could film a movie with a proper script? That would be the smart thing to do. However, they couldn't. Sony, which owned much of MGM and was distributing all their movies, demanded that Quantum of Solace still make their November 2008 release date, and they were not allowed to delay production, even though they had no final script. So apparently it was quite chaotic on set, with everyone constantly doing rewrites at the last minute. And Daniel Craig was even involved in rewriting his script. Daniel Craig said that the experience on set was terrible and he hated every minute of it. And in a 2021 interview, he called the making of Quantum of Solace a shit show. And he vowed never to work on a movie unless the script was nailed down. It should be noted that Daniel Craig was also injured 3 times during the making of this movie. The major injury was to his face, which required 4 stitches, but he also injured his shoulder, which required 6 surgical screws to be inserted in an operation, and had to have his arm in a sling. And finally, one of his fingertips was actually sliced off, and he laughed these off, noting that they did not really delay filming and joked that his finger may have led to him becoming a criminal, so having it cut off prevented him from actually becoming a criminal mastermind. Now, it should be noted that the finger actually did have a full recovery. And while Marc Forster is an excellent auteur-director, that doesn't immediately make him the most qualified screenwriter of a James Bond movie. And you can see that in some of his ideas, and ultimately in what ended up on screen. Marc Forster was fascinated with the idea of emotionally repressed characters and wanted Bond 22 to be a story about Bond learning to trust again. The story would basically begin as Bond is completely emotionally cut off and would have Bond slowly learning to open himself up and end with him learning to trust people again. Marc Forster created the character of Camille Montes to be a shadow reflection of Bond. And Camille is like Bond in that they're both consumed by a desire for revenge for the murder of their families. And like Bond, Camille is a skilled operative driven by a deeply personal mission that often puts her in dangerous situations. And like Bond, her anger and desire for revenge makes her careless and self-destructive. In Paul Haggis' original screenplay, the climax of the film took place in the snowy Swiss Alps. However, Marc Forster had the idea to relate the 4 action sequences to the 4 elements, earth, water, air, and fire, and he changed the final climax to take place in the Bolivian desert. So for the first action sequence, the car chase and the foot chase through the streets of Siena would represent the earth, there would be a boat chase that represents water, then there would be an airplane action sequence that represents air, and the final action sequence would be at a hotel in the desert that represents fire. Also, Marc Forster wanted to homage Goldfinger by having a character murdered in a manner similar to Shirley Eaton's Jill Masterson being covered in gold. But instead of being covered in gold, she would be murdered by being covered in oil. And the symbolism being that in the 21st century, oil has replaced gold as the most precious substance. And so Marc Forster removed the ending of the movie from the Swiss Alps to Bolivia and had an unnamed Spectre-like organization take over the water rights to Bolivia. And apparently, the plot of this movie actually happened in real life. The story was actually based on a real historical event known as the Cochabamba Water Revolt, which occurred in Bolivia in 1999, when a private company called Aguas de Tunari, a company partially owned by Bechtel, a U.S. multinational corporation, took over the water supply of Cochabamba, Bolivia's 4th largest city. And Aguas del Tunari was investing in the construction of a water dam which drastically raised the water rates in Bolivia. And the entire city protested, leading to tens of thousands marching downtown and battling the Bolivian police. So on April 10th, 2000, the Bolivian government reversed the privatization and took back control of the water. The idea of a wealthy individual buying water and then selling it back at a higher rate was also an homage to Chinatown, where Noah Cross buys a reservoir of water and sells it to the people of Los Angeles at a higher rate just to make more money, just like Quantum does in this movie. And these were the changes that Marc Forster made to this movie. So what did screenwriter Paul Haggis think of all these changes that Marc Forster made to his script? Paul Haggis hated it, and he thought Marc Forster's shooting script was terrible. As for the title of the movie, Michael G. Wilson considered the title Risico, which was the title of a short story by Ian Fleming in his For Your Eyes Only short story collection. And in the short story Risico, it's about 2 competing smugglers named Colombo and Christatos who were childhood friends, and when Bond first suspects that Colombo is a bad guy, he works with Christatos, but then finds out that Christatos is the real villain, and Bond ends up working with Colombo. So does this plot sound familiar? This plot was used in For Your Eyes Only. However, Michael G. Wilson changed his mind and decided on the title of Quantum of Solace, and this was announced on January 24th, 2008. The title Quantum of Solace was another short story that Ian Fleming wrote in the same For Your Eyes Only short story collection. And now there are only 5 Ian Fleming titles that had not been used for the movies. There was Risico, Quantum of Solace, Property of a Lady, and the Hildebrandt Rarity, and 007 in New York. So I guess out of those 5, Quantum of Solace was probably the best. Property of a Lady is about a Fabergé egg and was used for the plot of Octopussy. Hildebrandt Rarity was about an abusive man named Milton Crest who abuses his wife with the tail of a stingray, and few of the elements were used in the story of License to Kill. And 007 in New York was about James Bond traveling to New York to warn an old MI6 agent that her new boyfriend is really a KGB spy. Incidentally, the short story Quantum of Solace by Ian Fleming has nothing to do with this movie. The short story is actually about James Bond going to a dinner party and hearing a story about a married couple who hate each other, but in public they keep a facade of being happy. The wife cheats on the husband, and when the husband finally leaves the wife, he leaves her stranded in the Bahamas with unpaid debts. Quantum of Solace refers to the bare minimum respect a person must have for their partner for them to regard their partner as a human being and to stay in that relationship. And within that meaning, it can also represent the bare minimum respect that Bond may have for Vesper as a human being when considering that she betrayed him. However, that doesn't seem to be what Quantum of Solace means in the context of this movie. In the movie, Quantum of Solace seems to represent the small amount of peace or solace that Bond gets by letting go of his anger of Vesper betraying him and learning to trust others again. And that appears to be the theme of the movie. James Bond has been betrayed by whom he thought was the love of his life, and now she's dead. So he's gone a little crazy, and naturally he wants to find and destroy the people responsible for all of this. So the movie starts with a man who has nearly lost all of his humanity, driven by insane rage and hate, and he doesn't trust anyone, much less himself. And at this point, we don't know how much humanity he has left. We don't know how much allegiance he has to M or MI6 or even to England, and while he hunts the men responsible for Vesper's betrayal. And the movie is about how he slowly gains back his humanity and ultimately gains back his soul. The theme of Quantum of Solace is about justice versus vengeance. And Bond does have an arc in this movie. We can see that Bond is blinded by rage and desire for revenge, and he begins the movie on a quest to find and murder Vesper's boyfriend. He has clearly chosen vengeance over justice. And early in the movie, he kills Mitchell, and he kills Slate, even though M had hoped that he would keep them alive for questioning and information. However, as the movie progresses, Bond learns how powerful this organization is and begins to realize how out of her element that Vesper must have felt. He accidentally kills a Secret Service agent, and then he gets Matthis and Strawberry Fields killed, and he begins to see the self-destructive path that he is on. And finally, toward the end of the movie, Bond has Dominic Greene right where he wants him and is about to kill him, but instead chooses not to kill him, but rather questions him and gets information out of him. And at the very end of the movie, he's tracked down Vesper's boyfriend, has him dead to rights, but rather than kill him, he hands him over to MI6. So James Bond is wiser, more experienced, but he's no longer driven by rage and vengeance. He has chosen justice over vengeance. He is once again a British secret agent in service of the Crown. It's a nice character arc. Immediately, Daniel Craig was signed on to be in his second James Bond film. Now, he was paid $3 million for Casino Royale, and here he'll be paid $6.1 million for this movie, twice what he made in the last film. For the main Bond girl, Marc Forster created the character of Camille Montes, and the first thing Marc Forster avoided doing was to make her a love interest of James Bond. They worked together to bring down Greene and General Medrano, but there's never any romance between the two, aside from the final kiss they give each other. The idea is that Bond is still hurt over his love for Vesper and wasn't really ready for a new relationship. Over 400 women auditioned for Camille Montes, including an unknown law student named Gal Gadot. She didn't get the role, and she eventually lost it to Olga Kurylenko, but was close enough that she quit law school to pursue acting full-time, and a year later she landed the role in the 2009 Fast and Furious movie. Interestingly, a few years after that, Olga Kurylenko would audition for the role of Wonder Woman, but lose it to Gal Gadot. Marc Forster cast Olga Kurylenko because she had a calm presence that never seemed to get nervous and thought it fit an undercover Secret Service agent. Interestingly, Olga Kurylenko is not Bolivian. She's not even South American. She is Ukrainian and grew up in Moscow, and at age 17 was hired by a modeling company, and at age 18 began working in Paris. Her first acting job was in 2003 at the age of 24, where she was in Seal's music video, Love's Divine. And in 2016, at the age of 27, she quit modeling to pursue acting full-time and starred opposite Timothy Olyphant in the video game movie Hitman. Quantum of Solace was her breakout role, and from here, she'll go on to have a great acting career. She starred in Seven Psychopaths, then opposite Tom Cruise in Oblivion, and in Terry Gilliam's The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and starred in Johnny English Strikes Again. And today, her most high-profile role is as the Taskmaster in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Olga Kurylenko had not seen many Bond films because they were not easily available in Ukraine. And so she was given a DVD box set of all the James Bond films, and she binge-watched all of them. And one of her favorites was Tomorrow Never Dies, particularly Michelle Yeoh, who did her own stunts. This was very inspirational to Kurylenko, who similarly did many of her own stunts. Now for the main villain of the movie, we have Dominic Greene, played by Matthis Almeric. And Marc Forster wanted this villain to be a regular businessman and wanted him to be like any middle manager in the real world, and wanted to outline that many of society's evils are committed by normal-looking businessmen in suits working a 9-to-5 job. Initially, Bruno Ganz was going to play Dominic Greene, and this might have worked because Ganz has a powerful presence and even convincingly played Adolf Hitler. However, Marc Forster liked Matthis Almeric. He liked this everyman look and also felt that he gave the character of Dominic Greene a pitiful quality that he thought would be perfect for the movie. And when Matthis Almeric was offered the role, he accepted it right away. He was a James Bond fan and was honored to be able to play the villain in it. He said in interviews that he'd never be able to face his kids if he ever turned down a role in a James Bond movie. Now, Amalric wanted to wear makeup to give Dominic a sinister deformity, like a huge scar, and even offered to shave his own head. However, Marc Forster refused. He wanted Dominic Greene to look completely normal, like anyone you might see in a typical corporate office. Matthew Amalric based his performance of Dominic Greene on the British Prime Minister Tony Blair and on France's then President Nicolas Sarkozy. He based the fake smile of Tony Blair and the crazy eyes of Sarkozy. Matthew Amalric is a French actor who had achieved critical acclaim for playing Jean-Dominique Bauby in a 2007 film, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, about a man completely paralyzed by a rare condition known as locked-in syndrome. And I loved this movie, and I loved his portrayal in it. Now, Matthew Amalric will have a very prolific career in France, and in 2014, he'll achieve critical acclaim again for playing Serge X in Wes Anderson's The Grand Budapest Hotel. And while I can appreciate Matthew Amalric as a fantastic actor, I think Marc Forster made the wrong choice in casting him in this movie. Forster chose him because he gave Dominic Greene a pitiful quality? Well, I kind of agree. I mean, he certainly looks pathetic. But the problem is, I don't want my Bond villains to come across in a pitiful manner. I want them to be scary and powerful, and that way Bond can appear all the more heroic for beating him. You've heard that the hero is only as good as the villain? Well, I've always agreed with this. And I think the problem that Dominic Greene has in this movie is that he never seems like a threat for Bond. He's a straw man, and that's never good. That said, given the constraints of how Marc Forster wrote this movie, you gotta give credit to Matthew Amalric, who sort of gave Dominic Greene an offbeat sort of craziness that I think kind of worked for this movie. Now, an interesting character in this film is Strawberry Fields, played by Gemma Arterton. And she's a very controversial character. Well, she's not controversial. Bond's treatment of her is controversial, because she's a desk clerk from the embassy who was sent to escort Bond back to London, but Bond ends up seducing her, convinces her to help investigate Dominic Greene, and then he gets her killed. And you can't deny that Bond's treatment of her is kind of mean. Well, the character of Fields was introduced in the original draft by Neal Purvis and Robert Wade, and she was not supposed to be killed in the movie. However, Marc Forster wanted to homage Goldfinger and have her die by being covered in oil. For this role, they interviewed 1,500 actresses, and Marc Forster found Gemma Arterton, who was a relative unknown, but found her very smart and witty, and cast her in this movie. And Gemma Arterton had only been in one movie, St. Trinian's in 2007, and a handful of TV shows. Quantum of Solace would only be her second movie, but her first blockbuster role, which would be her breakout performance. From here, she would star in Clash of the Titans, Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, and Hansel and Gretel and the Witch Hunters. And on to an amazing acting career. And she does make an impression in this movie, despite her role being a very minor one. You can already see the star power on screen, and it's no wonder she became a full-blown movie star after being in this film. And I do remember at the time there being a lot of buzz about her before Quantum of Solace was released. So I was quite surprised how quickly she died in the movie. Now, after the release of this movie, Barbara Broccoli realized that they had a future breakout superstar playing Strawberry Fields and realized they had a potential breakout character whom they could have used for future installments of the movie, and she genuinely regretted killing off this amazing character. For location scouting, Marc Forster and Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli were captivated by an event in Siena, Italy known as the Palio di Siena. And this is an annual horse race held twice a year on July 2nd and on August 16th at the Piazza del Campo City Square. And the horse race is actually 3 laps around the city square, and the race usually only lasts about a minute and a half. But Marc Forster and Michael G. Wilson loved the spectacle of this horse race and wanted it in their movie, because they knew the average filmgoer would have never seen anything like this, and it would be perfectly in line with Bond's films taking the audience to exotic locales. So 2 months before the filming of this movie, the film crew filmed much of the scenes of the Palio di Siena, much like a documentary crew filming an event. And they filmed the large crowds and the racing of the horses. And 2 months later, when it came time to film the movie and film Daniel Craig as Bond chasing Mitchell through the Piazza del Campo, they hired 1,000 extras to be in the background. And when combined with the footage of the real race filmed 2 months earlier, it created the illusion that Bond was chasing Mitchell during the Palio di Siena. It really is a seamless scene. Now for the location of both Bolivia and Haiti, the crew chose Panama City to represent both. And some people do complain that the scenes in Haiti and Bolivia look too similar. Well, there's a reason for that. They were both filmed in Panama. Now the organization of Quantum was essentially Spectre, because in 2008, Kevin McClory owned the rights to Spectre, and it appeared that Eon would never be able to use Spectre ever. And Barbara Broccoli verified that Quantum was Spectre and was going to be the recurring main antagonist for the Daniel Craig James Bond. However, bizarrely enough, in 2015, Eon Films was able to settle with the estate of Kevin McClory, and they were able to get the rights to Spectre. So they retconned Quantum to be a subsidiary of Spectre. Now the budget of this film soared to an astonishing $230 million, which was a huge increase from the last film. Casino Royale was essentially made for $72 million, so Quantum of Solace was made for 3 times the budget of that movie. However, much of this was offset once again by product placement. Ford Motor Company, which owned Aston Martin, Range Rover, and Volvo, signed a 3-picture promotion deal worth $100 million. Other product placement included Omega SA watches. Other brands include Heineken Pilsner beer, with ads featuring Olga Kurilenko. Also featured Coca-Cola's Coke Zero, Smirnoff vodka, Bollinger champagne, and of course had a product placement deal with Sony Electronics, which owned part of MGM as well as being the distributors of this movie. The deal included Sony Bravia televisions, Sony Vaio laptops, and had a tie-in ad for Sony HD television and Sony Ericsson cell phones. Virgin Atlantic Airlines also paid for product placement as well as Avon products, including the Bond Girl 007 collection with ads featuring Gemma Arterton. Tom Ford paid to have his clothes featured, which included Bond's tuxedo and his sunglasses. And finally, you had Activision's Quantum of Solace video game. Now for the action sequences, do you think the fight scenes looked a little too much like Jason Bourne? Well, there's a reason for that. Don Bradley, who was the second unit director for this movie, was also the second unit director for The Bourne Supremacy and The Bourne Ultimatum. So the movie starts right away with a car chase through a village in Italy, and right away we realize that there's no gun barrel sequence. Oddly enough, it's going to be at the end of the film. And there are also other elements of the Bond franchise that also are not present in this movie. Of course, there's no Moneypenny, there's no Q, but did you know that James Bond never utters the phrase,
"The name's Bond, James Bond."
And he never orders a drink, vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
Miss Kennedy, would you get me a medium dry vodka martini?
What is that?
Shaken, not stirred.
So we're thrown right in the middle of a car chase, and we really don't know what's going on. Like, how long after Casino Royale is this? Is this right after, or is it a year after? And for a while, we have no idea. Now, the car chase is very interesting and has a lot of fast cuts, which does make it a little difficult to follow. And the quick cuts are going to be a preview what all of the action scenes look like. There's a quick cut, fast edit, quick cut. It is confusing. And adding to the confusion is that all the cars are the exact same color, and they look exactly alike. James Bond car is a dark gray Aston Martin, and it almost looks black, while the 2 cars chasing him are Alfa Romeos, and they are black. And I think this was a huge mistake, and it may already reflect Marc Forster's inexperience as an action director. Although it should be said that Gary Powell acted as a stunt coordinator, and he's very experienced at this sort of thing. I think if he had Bond be in a totally different colored car, I think that may have helped. After all, he crashed and rolled his silver Aston Martin DBS V12 at the end of Casino Royale, so there's no reason why he'd need to be driving another Aston Martin DBS V12. In fact, at the beginning of this movie, he's driving a different colored Aston Martin DBS V12. So what they're saying is that after he rolled his silver Aston Martin DBS V12, and while he and Vesper were having a great time in Venice, Bond actually went to an Aston Martin dealership and purchased another Aston Martin, but this time in dark gray. He would have had to have this car when he shot Mr. White. So Bond could have driven any car of any color. And so why not have a little fun with this? Make him drive a platinum white Aston Martin, which is actually a very common color for Aston Martins. or make it gold or some other colors. Do you know Aston Martins actually come in green or orange or even red? And that way, Bond's car could stand out from the other cars pursuing him. And that might have helped with the clarity. And during this chase, the police cars enter the scene and one of the bad guys shoots their machine guns at the police car and causes it to roll down the side of the mountain. And Bond almost crashes it, but has to swerve to avoid it, and this was an homage to a similar scene in For Your Eyes Only, where Bond and Melina, in their yellow Citroen, has to swerve to avoid a bad guy who rolled down the side of the mountain. And one of the Alfa Romeos crashes into a large truck, while Bond grabs his assault rifle and shoots the other driver, causing it to fly off a cliff. After Bond dispatches his pursuers, he makes it to an underground safe house, where we find out that Mr. White was in the trunk of the car the whole time. And that's a fun moment, where we now realize that for the entire car chase, with all the crashes and spinning and, which was a very dangerous chase, there was actually Mr. White stuck in the trunk of the car. And it makes you realize that all the men pursuing Bond, the two Alfa Romeos, and firing all their machine guns and trying to make Bond crash, they had to be aware that their boss, the man they were apparently trying to rescue, was in the car they were almost destroying. So now we realize that this car chase is only a few moments after Bond shoots Mr. White during the ending of Casino Royale, making this an immediate sequel to that movie. And apparently this entire car chase was very difficult to film. It took 8 weeks to film and involved many delays and many crashes. It involved 7 Aston Martin DBSs, each priced at around $200,000, and 8 Alfa Romeos, which subbed in for the 2 that we saw on screen. Multiple cars were wrecked, and one of the stuntmen, Eris Komnenos, was seriously injured during the filming of the scene. Well, after the chase, we get the music montage. And it looks very different from the previous montages. It looks kind of cartoony and basically has James Bond walking in the sand. All the previous montages were basically done by 3 people. You had Maurice Bender, who did Dr. No. You had Robert Brownjohn, who created the title sequence for From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. And then back to Maurice Bender, who did all 14 title sequences from Thunderball all the way to License to Kill. Then Daniel Kleinman took over with GoldenEye and did all the title sequences for all the Brosnan films, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, and also did that cool montage for Casino Royale. However, for Quantum of Solace, director Marc Forster brought in his own graphic designs company to do the title sequence for this film, and that company was known as MK12. MK12 is a small graphic effects company based out of Kansas City that did the visual effects for Marc Forster's Stranger Than Fiction, so he hired them to do the title sequence for this movie. Now, incidentally, Daniel Kleinman will return for the next film, Skyfall, as well as Spectre and No Time to Die. And to be honest, I don't think it's a bad montage. It looks different, to be honest. I actually thought it was Daniel Kleinman. Now, the song Another Way to Die was written by David Arnold and was performed by Jack White and Alicia Keys. And this song is interesting because when I hear it, it's an okay song, but it absolutely leaves no impression. I completely forget it after I hear it, and each time I hear it again, I think, oh yeah, this song. Actually, Paul McCartney, who sang the classic song Live and Let Die, was asked to perform the song, but he turned it down, but he recommended Amy Winehouse, who actually did record a demo for the movie, but Amy Winehouse was going through personal struggles at the time with her battle with drugs and alcohol, as well as a deteriorating relationship with her husband, and she could not do the song, and therefore they found Jack White and Alicia Keys, who had been wanting to do a duet together, and this was the opportunity to do a duet for the first time. So Bond takes Mr. White out of the car, and M and Bond interrogate him, and we think that they might have the upper hand, and M says,
"The longer it takes, the more painful we'll make it."
But rather than be scared, Mr. White breaks out in laughter, and it's really weird and confusing. Then Mr. White says,
"You really don't know anything about us. We are on the other side, thinking, oh, the MI6, the CIA, they're looking over our shoulders, they're listening to our conversations, and the truth is you don't even know we exist."
And then Mr. White says,
"First thing you should know about us is that we have people everywhere. Am I right?"
And at that moment, M's bodyguard Mitchell pulls out his gun and kills a fellow agent and reveals that he is a mole for Mr. White in MI6. And that is a crazy moment and really outlines how powerful this organization of Quantum really is. I think it's one of the best scenes in the entire movie. Later, we'll learn that Mitchell had been with MI6 for 8 years and had served 5 years as M's bodyguard. And that is really terrifying if you think about it. Mitchell takes off and Bond goes after him, and suddenly we're in a huge action chase sequence. And it's a great chase, and Marc Forster did add images of the horse race, the Palio di Siena, to accentuate the chase. And what's cool is that Daniel Craig did most of his own stunts here. When you see Bond fall on the roof of the bus, you can see that it really is Daniel Craig who did the stunt. So Bond is chasing Mitchell, and Mitchell looks back and shoots Bond, but misses and hits an innocent bystander in the shoulder. Now, one of the criticisms is that the action sequence is very difficult to follow, and I do have to agree. Again, it's the Jason Bourne fast editing, quick cut effect. The two make it to the roof of a church, and Bond chases Mitchell through the roof of a construction site, and they fall to the roof and they get tangled in the scaffolding. Finally, they both scramble for their guns, but Bond grabs his gun a millisecond faster and shoots and kills Mitchell. So Mitchell is killed, but Mr. White has escaped. In the next scene, Bond goes to London. Bond and M are in Mitchell's apartment looking for clues. And M is incredulous.
When someone says we've got people everywhere, you expect it to be hyperbole. Lots of people say that. Florists use that expression. Doesn't mean that they've got somebody working for them inside the bloody room.
And we learn that M was hoping Bond wouldn't kill Mitchell so that he could be interrogated for information. This is the first of the kills where M had hoped Bond would have kept alive, where Bond has chosen instead to kill. But here I think we can kind of forgive him. After all, Bond barely got the drop on Mitchell, and a millisecond difference, Mitchell could have killed him. Now, in Mitchell's apartment, they find a random $20 bill. So they go to the new MI6 building, which has been redesigned to look very modern. It has a lot of glass. It has a lot of white and silver. I guess it looks okay. They find out that the $20 bill is associated with Lashif's money. And with a computer at MI6, they're able to track that a group of $20 bills is linked to an assassin in Haiti named Edmund Slate. And M and Bond go to this computer table, which looks like something out of a science fiction movie. I mean, it's really cool and it's very futuristic. And this entire scene was designed by MK12, the graphics company that designed the title sequence. And you can tell that Marc Forster is very proud of the scene because he really focuses a lot of time on it, even though the purpose of the entire sequence is just to connect that $20 bill that Mitchell had to Mr. Slate in Haiti. So Bond heads off to meet Mr. Slate in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and M demands that he bring in Slate alive. So Bond goes to Slate's apartment and has a fight with Slate. And it's a great fight sequence. Again, you can definitely see the influence of Jason Bourne. But Bond has the upper hand, cuts Slate's jugular vein, and then his femoral artery, and makes him bleed out, eventually killing him. And despite M's wanting Bond not to kill Slate, Bond kills Slate anyway. And this is the second kill where Bond disobeys M in service of his murderous rampage. Now this one is a little harder to excuse because he really didn't have to kill Slate. He could have let him live, so he obviously intentionally killed him. Bond takes Slate's briefcase and heads outside, and then a woman randomly pulls up on Bond thinking that he's Slate, and Bond just goes with the flow and gets in the car. And the woman is Camille Montes, played by Olga Kurylenko, and she's going to turn out to be the main Bond girl of this movie. And when Bond opens up the briefcase, he sees a gun and a photo of Camille, and we realize that Slate's job was to assassinate Camille. And Bond turns to her and says,
I think someone wants to kill you.
Camille then tries to shoot Bond, but Bond is able to escape, and he knocks down Slate's accomplice and steals his scooter. And Bond follows Camille to the headquarters of the main villain, Dominic Greene. And Camille goes to Dominic to confront him for trying to kill her, and basically says,
So you did just try and have me killed?
So why did Greene try to kill Camille? Well, apparently she was snooping around Greene's organization to try to get information, and that's why Greene tried to kill her, but she pretends that she was really trying to help him to find the leak in his organization. But Greene shows her that he's already killed the man that she was talking to. And once we meet Dominic Greene, he's kind of underwhelming and he's kind of weak, and I think Marc Forster was correct that he really is kind of pitiful. I gotta give credit to how Matthew Almeric played him, because there is something a little offbeat about Dominic Greene. And he definitely has the crazy eyes, he's got that fake smile, and that makes him a little unpredictable. And I think this was all the fine acting of Matthew Almeric. And here we learn that Camille is sleeping with Dominic Greene so that he can introduce her to the Bolivian General Medrano, who Camille wants to murder. General Medrano killed her family when Camille was very young, and she wants revenge. But later in the movie, she's going to turn out to be Bolivian Secret Service. But I'm not sure that plot really goes anywhere, because I think the best reveals are the ones that fundamentally change a past scene. Like in an excellent screenplay, you watch it one way the first time, and then you watch it again knowing the reveal, and that scene takes on a whole new meaning. And it doesn't really happen here. But okay, she's Bolivian Secret Service. I don't think it really changes this scene. Meanwhile, Bond has followed Camille to Green's Harbor, where he meets Green's henchman, the bowl-cut sporting Elvis, portrayed by Anatoly Tobman. And this is cool. Bond gives Green's men a business card that says Universal Exports. Universal Exports is MI6's cover, and also the cover that James Bond frequently uses when on assignment, and has appeared in Dr. No, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, For Your Eyes Only, The Living Daylights, License to Kill, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. And I love that they use it here. And the card says the name R. Sterling, which apparently is the alias that James Bond is using on this assignment. Although the name R. Sterling is an Easter egg. James Bond has used that alias before. In The Spy Who Loved Me, James Bond introduced himself as Robert Sterling.
Equipped to repair that oversight, Mr. Stromberg. My name is Sterling, Robert Sterling.
And when the henchman called the number on the card, it goes to Universal Export's voicemail, but it's really installing a connection to Elvis's cell phone that will allow Bond to track him. And here, did you catch this guy sweeping the air? Let's see it again. In the background, we see a guy who is basically sweeping the air. General Medrano meets Dominic Greene to discuss his coup to take over Bolivia. So how does Quantum take over a country? Well, 1, they destabilize the government. 2, they supply private security. 3, they pay off the right officials. And 4, they have 26 countries that will recognize the new government, giving it legitimacy. And all Quantum wants in return is a large, seemingly worthless desert and anything they find there. General Medrano knows that there's absolutely no oil there, so he's easily willing to give that up. However, the general doesn't know that the area contains a huge reservoir of water, a substance more important than oil. So Dominic Greene basically gives the general, Camille Montes, to do with as he wishes, and then recommends he throw her overboard once he's done with her. And man, that is brutal. So General Medrano and his men take Camille. Here we get Marc Forster's second of his 4 elements. This is the water element action sequence. Bond rides his motorcycle on several boats and finally gets on one boat in pursuit of Medrano to rescue Camille. Bond crashes into General Medrano's boat, and this gives Camille a chance to assassinate the general, but for some reason, Bond stops her. Now it is an exciting chase. Camille gets knocked out, and then Bond throws his anchor into the final boat, and this causes that boat to flip over. But how does throwing an anchor into a pursuing boat cause it to fly in the air and then sail past you? And apparently this is a big discussion point on the internet, and no one can give a good explanation. So the best explanation that fans can come up with is that Bond must have thrown one end of the anchor onto the ship, and in an unseen, perhaps cut scene, he threw the other end of the anchor into the sea, which caused the bad guy boat to flip over. But it doesn't explain then why the boat flies forward. I think the only answer has to be that this scene was much longer and they had many other action elements in it, but the sequence was cut and edited back together in an imperfect manner that may have maximized emotional excitement but ends up not making much logical sense. Bond then makes it ashore, where he drops off Camille to a porter and basically leaves her there, and that'll be the end of Camille for a while. Bond checks in with M at MI6, and we meet the new Bill Tanner, played by Rory Kinnear. And Bond asks Bill Tanner to look into Dominic Greene. Bill Tanner is M's chief of staff, who appeared all the way in the beginning of James Bond in Ian Fleming's 1953 novel, Casino Royale. And in the movies, he made his first appearance in The Man with the Golden Gun, played by Michael Goodliff, and in For Your Eyes Only, played by James Villiers. In the Brosnan movies, Bill Tanner was played by Michael Kitchens, and for the Daniel Craig movies, Rory Kinnear will portray him here, but will return in Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. Now, on a private plane, we see that the CIA is in bed with Dominic Greene, and the CIA section chief over South America is Greg Beam, played by a very young David Harbour, a whole decade before he played Jim Hopper in Stranger Things, and almost another decade and a half before he played the Red Guardian in The Black Widow and Santa Claus in Violent Night. Greg Beam offers to look the other way during General Medrano's takeover of Bolivia as long as Quantum can guarantee Bolivia continue to supply the U.S. with oil. And Greene makes a request for the CIA to get rid of James Bond, but when Beam asks Felix Leiter if he knows who James Bond is, Leiter says he doesn't. And this attracts a suspicion from Beam, who wonders if he can really trust Felix Leiter. And then this subplot is dropped forever. So we can assume that this was going to be a whole subplot in the movie that completely ended up getting dropped and cut out. And this has been verified. In the original script, there was a whole subplot with Felix Leiter and the intrigues at the CIA. But with last-minute on-set rewrites, the whole subplot got dropped and it wasn't even filmed. And that's too bad, because I think it would have made a more interesting movie. We then go to Austria, where Bond follows his phone tracker on Elvis's cell phone and tracks Elvis and Greene to an opera in Austria. Bond sneaks into the opera, and this is a great sequence. This is one of my favorite sequences in the entire movie. This really should have been the entire movie. Bond steals a tuxedo from the staff, and then he observes one man get a special gift bag, and this intrigues him. So he follows the man into the restroom where he knocks him out and discovers that these special gift bags have an earpiece. He leaves the man to sleep, and he breaks the handle off the bathroom door, and he puts in the earpiece. Now the opera is Tosca, and you can see the parallels between the opera and Vesper's own situation. But you can also see James Bond as Tosca as well, also trying to avenge Vesper Lynd. In the opera Tosca by Puccini, Floria Tosca is in love with Cavadarossi, but the villainous police chief, Barton Scarpia, imprisons Cavadarossi and threatens to kill him unless Tosca submits to his advances. Tosca kills Baron Scarpia with a knife, and then Cavadarossi is executed, and Tosca, in a rage, jumps to her death. See the parallels? Bond learns that the opera is where many of the high members of Quantum meet in the open to discuss their plans, including the overthrow of the Bolivian government. So Bond chimes in and he suggests that the members find a new place to meet. And this freaks out the members of Quantum, who one by one get up and walk out of the opera. And this is exactly what Bond wanted. He takes photos of everyone who gets up and sends them to MI6 for analysis. Mr. White is also in the audience, but he's way too smart to fall for it, and he remains seated. And when he sees people get up, he even jokes to a stranger next to him,
Well, Tosca isn't for everyone.
And it's just a reminder what a great character Mr. White was. And it's too bad that they didn't do more with that character, both in this movie and later in the franchise. I do think he deserved better as a villainous character. Hashtag justice for the villain, Mr. White. MI6 analyzes the photo and recognizes a billionaire who owns mines in Siberia, another as a Mossad agent who now owns a telecommunications company, and another who's a high-ranking advisor to the British Prime Minister. And we can assume that Bond sent many pictures to MI6. And we absolutely begin to see how powerful Quantum, or shall we say Spectre, really is. And as Bond leaves, he runs into Dominic Greene and his men, and this leads them to a chase through the opera building. One man gets a drop on him, and Bond actually thinks it's one of Greene's men, but he really isn't. He's the advisor's bodyguard, a member of British Secret Service, of Special Branch, and we have to assume that he's completely innocent. So Bond tries to get information about Quantum out of him, but he doesn't really know anything, so Bond drops the man off the roof onto a car, thinking it's one of Greene's men, but later finds out that it's an innocent member of Special Branch who was just doing his job. Of course, Bond doesn't kill him. It's actually Greene's men who actually murders him, but Bond clearly got him killed when he threw him off the roof onto Greene's car. And I think this is the first of 3 deaths that Bond inadvertently causes, thus slowly making him realize that his own quest for revenge is only destroying the innocents around him. This will eventually lead him to his own self-destruction. Second, he'll get Renee Matthis killed, and third, he'll get Strawberry Fields killed. And it is then that Bond will begin to question his quest for revenge. So next, Bond actually flies to Talamone and visits Matthis. And when Matthis sees him, at first he doesn't want anything to do with Bond. Remember, Bond had him arrested at the end of Casino Royale. So Matthis was arrested, investigated, and eventually found innocent and was given a nice retirement villa in Italy. So when Bond asks for help, of course Matthis initially refuses, but he eventually gives in and gives us help. Bond and Matthis go to Bolivia, and at the Bolivian airport, Agent Fields is waiting for them, and her job is to escort Bond back to London. However, the next flight out of Bolivia is the next morning, and so Bond says, "So we have all night." Fields is about to check them into a cheap hotel, but Bond checks the three of them into a 5-star resort in the center of Bolivia. And at the resort, Bond seduces Fields. That night, Bond takes Fields and Matthis to Greene's fundraiser party. And Matthis has met the chief of police, who offers his help to help Bond. However, the chief of police is secretly working for General Medrano and will betray them. He'll torture Matthis and set Bond up for his arrest. At the party, Bond spots Camille, and Camille offers to tell Bond what she knows about Dominic Greene and Quantum and what they're doing in the desert. Meanwhile, Elvis follows Bond and Camille, but Field trips him down the stairs. And that is going to be the last anyone will have heard from Fields. Bond and Camille leave the party, but they're stopped by the Bolivian police, who ask Bond to open the trunk. And Bond wonders why. Why would they ask to open the trunk? And when he opens the trunk, it's clear that they have tortured Matthis and put him there. But he's still alive, so they shoot him. Well, Bond kills the two policemen, and he stays with Matthis as he dies in Bond's arms. And with his final breath, Matthis implores Bond to forgive Vesper, which he will do by the end of the movie. And after Matthis dies, Bond throws him in a dumpster and takes his money to make it look like a robbery. Bond and Camille borrow an airplane, and they go in the air, and here we're going to get the third of Forster's element-based action sequence. They're attacked by another plane. Bond gets the plane to crash, but his plane is destroyed, and they jump out of the plane with one parachute, and they go into the sinkhole. And in the scene when Camille and Bond free fall from a shot-down airplane with only one parachute between the two of them and struggle to secure that one parachute before hitting the ground, Olga Kurylenko performed this skydiving stunt using an indoor wind tunnel rather than jumping from a plane. And here's how she and Daniel Craig prepared and filmed the action sequence. Kurylenko spent a month learning how to body fly, a form of indoor skydiving, at the Body Flight Center in Bedfordshire, England, and she described the training as extremely physical and challenging, and after the first 5-minute session in the wind tunnel, she was so sore that she couldn't lift her arms the next day. However, by the end of the training, she was able to stay up in the air for up to 30 minutes. Bond and Camille land in the sinkhole, and here they discover that Dominic Greene and Quantum have been damming up water supplies and intentionally causing a drought in the area. So they realize that Quantum and Greene are not after oil at all, but they're after water. And when they return to Bond's hotel, we learn that Fields has been murdered by being dipped in oil. And I know this is supposed to be an homage to Goldfinger, and Marc Forster thought it would even be more spectacular than an image of Shirley Eaton's iconic image of being covered in gold, but I'm not really sure it works. But still, it is a horrific death, and we really feel sorry for Fields. And Bond now realizes that he's gotten another innocent person killed and begins to weigh the costs of his vengeance. M recalls Bond, but Bond escapes MI6 to follow his lead about Quantum and the water, and M realizes that Bond isn't just on a crazy murder spree, but may still be on the case. We then go to the finale of the movie at a fictional hotel called the Perla de las Lunas in the middle of the Bolivian desert. And this desert was filmed in the Atacama Desert and is considered the driest region on Earth, with no record of any measurable rainfall ever having occurred in the past 200 years. It is drier than the Sahara Desert. Incidentally, McMurdo Desert in Antarctica is number 2, Aswan Desert in Egypt is number 3, and the Sahara Desert is number 4. The Atacama Desert covers 40,000 square miles and extends into countries of Chile, Bolivia, Argentina, and Peru. Subbing in for the fictional Perla de las Lunas is the very real Paranal Observatory's ESO Hotel, which really is in the Atacama Desert and is known for its alien look and has been called the boarding house on Mars and has also been called the oasis for astronomers. And in the real ESO Hotel's interior, there's a swimming pool and a botanical garden. General Medrano and the chief of police, the one who set Matthis up, are meeting with Quantum to finalize the details of the coup. And Quantum has Medrano sign a contract stating that Quantum will be their sole water utilities company, and Medrano reluctantly agrees. Bond and Camille raid the facility, and then we get fire, the final motif of Forster's element-based action sequences. Bond kills the chief of police and avenges Matthis, while Camille is able to kill Medrano and avenge her parents. Bond and Dominic Greene square off, and Bond wins and is about to kill Greene but at the last minute he chooses not to and lets him go so that he can save Camille. Bond captures Greene and does indeed get all the information about Quantum from him, just as M would have wanted. Camille and Bond share a kiss, but they do not make love. And this is the first movie in the history of the 007 franchise where James Bond and the main Bond girl do not share a romance. However, there were plans to have Camille return for Bond 23 as his girlfriend, but they decided to go in a completely different direction for Skyfall, and therefore Olga Kurylenko did not return. The movie ends with Bond in Kazan, Russia, and he's tracked down Vesper's old boyfriend, Yusuf Kabira, who works for Quantum, and he's already working his next victim, a woman named Corinne who works for Canadian intelligence. Soon, she'll learn that Yusuf Kabira has been kidnapped, and Corinne will have to reveal sensitive information to prevent Yusuf Kabira from being killed. Bond essentially rescues her from a fate similar to Vesper. Bond interrogates the boyfriend and finds out what he wanted to know about Vesper, that she really was just an innocent pawn tricked and manipulated by Quantum, and she was just in way over her head. He doesn't kill Yusuf Kabira and leaves him to be arrested by MI6. Bond has finally chosen justice over vengeance. M tells Bond that Greene was found with 2 bullet holes in the back of his head, obviously killed by Quantum, and that Beam in the CIA, played by David Harbour, has been fired and Felix Leiter has been promoted to his position. And Bond says,
Well, then the right people kept their jobs.
M tells him that he needs Bond back, and Bond tells her.
I never left.
Finally, the movie ends with the gun barrel sequence, telling us that Bond is now fully the 007 of the film franchise, the one that we all know and love. Now, apparently there was an ending that was filmed where we would see Mr. White meeting with a man named Guy Haines, one of the members of Quantum, seen at the Tosca Opera. And Mr. White would be about to kill Haines, but Bond would come out of nowhere and shoot Mr. White, killing him. And when Mr. Haines asks, "Who the hell are you?" Bond would answer,
"Who the hell are you?"
Bond. James Bond.
Cue the theme music, and there the movie would end. However, Marc Forster realized that adding this scene would completely negate Bond's character arc of letting Greene and Vesper's boyfriend survive at the end to get justice. And he also thought that maybe Mr. White could return for more Bond films. And so the deleted scene has never been revealed to the public. But a similar scene was in the Quantum of Solace video game, giving us a little taste of what was originally planned and filmed. Quantum of Solace had their premiere at the Odeon Leicester Square on October 28, 2008, and both Prince William and Harry attended. When the movie was released, critically, the reception was mixed, leaning toward the positive. Most found it an entertaining movie, everyone praised Daniel Craig's performance, but criticized the overall grim and gritty feel of the movie, and every critic preferred Casino Royale over this film. Roger Ebert did not like the film and gave it a thumbs down. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a rating of 65% of critics liking the film, while CinemaScore audience poll gave it a grade of a B-. Bond actor Roger Moore, who absolutely loved Casino Royale, seemed to sum up Quantum of Solace perfectly, and he said, "Craig was a damn good Bond, but the film as a whole, there was a bit too much flash cutting, and it was like a commercial of the action. There didn't seem to be any geography, and you're wondering what the hell was going on." That's great, but Roger Moore just nailed it. Now, this movie, made on a budget of $230 million, it opened to the #1 spot in the US, making $67 million in its first weekend. Quantum of Solace would go on to make $168 million in the US and Canada and $421 million internationally, for a total box office gross of $589 million, making it a very financially successful film. However, today, time has not been very kind to this movie. It is now generally regarded as a mid to lower tiered film, with many sites ranking it in the bottom 5 of the franchise. In 2022, Yahoo, which ranked GoldenEye the #1 James Bond film and Casino Royale the #2 James Bond film, ranked Quantum of Solace 22 out of 23 films, just above Die Another Day, basically the second worst film in the franchise. In 2021, Film Threat ranked Quantum of Solace number 23 out of 24 Bond films, and Entertainment Weekly, who ranked Goldfinger #1 and From Russia with Love #2, ranked Quantum of Solace number 23 out of 25 films, just above Die Another Day and Moonraker. So what did you think of Quantum of Solace? Did you think that it was better or worse than Casino Royale? Let me know in the comments below. And now in our next video, we're going to talk about the follow-up to this movie, the absolutely brilliant Skyfall, which often competes with Casino Royale as arguably the best James Bond movie in the entire franchise. And that's my video on Quantum of Solace. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other videos on other movies of the James Bond franchise. That ends this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great time.